because it is managed by beekeepers. But there are many more wild bees. Some are big, others small, hairy, or shiny. Some have long antennae, others short antennae. Some have a red behind, some have a yellow behind. There are more than 20,000 different species of bees in the world. For context, there are twice as many bee species as bird species. Most live solitary lives rather than nesting in colonies with a queen, and they are crucial for plants. For example, some bee species are awesome at pollinating tomatoes, while others are good with rosemary, pears, or blackberries. Altogether, they allow plants to reproduce, including most of the crops that feed us. Unfortunately, many of them are disappearing. But why? Well, the problem is complex. The main cause is that we are destroying the places where they live. We have turned woods and grasslands into crop fields and cities where many wild species cannot survive. On top of this, we use pesticides on our crops, intoxicating the few species that can adapt to them. Climate change also affects them. For example, when temperatures rise, some species are forced to find cooler places to live. If they don't find them, they simply die. Also, we are moving many species around the world. Some of them bring new diseases, with devastating effects for native bees. We know that each of these things is causing some bee species to disappear. But when they happen simultaneously, the extinctions may multiply. What can we do? Well, many things. First, we need to better maintain our landscape by preserving natural areas. Also, we need to make our cities and crops more friendly for bees. For example, growing native flowers in them. We have to minimize pesticides, even avoid them if possible. We need to slow down global warming by reducing CO2 emissions, and that's not only for bees. Also, we have to be more careful to avoid moving animals indiscriminately around the world. Stopping bee decline is in our hands. In yours, too.
Okay, so I hope you could all well hear the video. Yeah, did that work? Awesome. So what I like about this little video is it's like very concise and short, and it's a great introduction into many aspects that we're going to delve into a bit deeper. What we want to do here mostly is like focusing more on the bees here in BC actually. So we've heard in the video that there are more than 20,000 different bee species worldwide, but how many do we have in BC? So there are 483 confirmed different bee species in BC. Some of our own bee experts actually estimated like more over like 600 different species. So there's some range in there. But looking at this map of BC's eco-provinces, we can see the highest bee diversity, not only in BC, but in all of Canada, can be found in the southern interior at around 400 species. So as for Vancouver, the most recent study recorded 56 different species in the city alone. So let's take a look on how those bees in our city actually look like.
So honeybees are often the first kinds of bees that we learn about in our early days. From them, we often come to think of bees as being yellow and black, making honey, and the fact that they sting. Well, this is true about honeybees. There's actually a lot more complexity to the world of wild bees in BC. And though honeybees are a fascinating and important domesticated species in North America, they're not actually from here. So they were first brought over to our continent by European settlers in the 1600s in order to produce wax, honey, and also to pollinate crops and gardens. So since honeybees rely on human survival in North America, they don't really need to be saved by us in the same way that native bees do. Honeybees, for example, don't have habitat here that needs to be protected. They only survive because they're supported by beekeepers that caretake them. And also in the first Native Bee Society newsletter, our president did a little feature on this, like the difference between honeybees and native bees. So if you're curious to learn more about that, please check it out. It's on our social media pages where you can find it. So next slide. Martina's just switching the slides here for me, so it might be flaky. So in truth, yellow and black is actually not so common in the world of native bees. In fact, wild bees actually come in all colors of the rainbow. And if you're wondering, all of these photos were taken in British Columbia. So here we see a red cuckoo bee on the left, a yellow and orange bumblebee. We see a turquoise sweat bee and a green, blue, and black mason bees. Further, native bees come in all shapes and sizes. So here we have a photo of the largest and smallest bees in North America. The small bee, or Perdita, or the fairy bee, are actually very common in the interior of BC. The larger bee that's depicted here, Zalicopa, are found on the other side of the continent rather than BC. But many of our largest queen bumblebees, such as Bombus nevadensis, or the Nevada bumblebee on the right-hand side here, grow just as big. And that's a quarter for reference. So some of our bees are up to almost 2 inches. So next up, some of our native bees are social, but this is a little less than 10%, so not a huge percentage. The predominantly social native bees in British Columbia are bumblebees, which are in the same family as the European honeybee. Bumblebees colonies are much smaller than honeybee colonies, numbering in the hundreds rather than the thousands. And they have a queen who starts off the nest independently and lays the first generation of workers. And then later on in the year, around now actually, the workers hatch out and start taking on caretaking and foraging roles. And then there's a whole succession. Later in the summer, new queens are laid as well as drone males, and they mate together and start next year's generation of bumblebees. In this photo, you can see small waxy pots that are made by the colony to hold food and larvae. But social bees actually only make up a small amount of our total bee species. Most of our wild bees are, next slide, solitary. So over 90% of the world's bees are solitary, meaning that a single female bee will construct her nest with multiple cells. And each of these cells shall provision with food and lay an egg inside. And there are varying levels of sociability in solitary bees, ranging from gregarious, meaning when solitary females will nest in aggregations, to semi-social bees, which create independent nests within a shared entrance. So here on the left, we have a solitary leafcutter bee who's digging into her burrow. And on the right, we have a mining bee, or Andrena miserabilis, which is a gregarious lawn nesting species that's common in Vancouver. Parasitic bees. Some of you here might be like, what? What does that mean? But parasitism is actually something that's sprung up in many different places along the course of bee evolution. And it's actually more common than sociality is in the world of bees. So parasitic bees, or cuckoo bees, enter the nest of their pollen collecting hosts, so a native bee species, and they'll lay their eggs in the cell. And either the adult female who's entering the nest or her larvae will actually hatch out and kill the host's offspring. And then the new baby parasite bee then consumes the pollen and nectar that was left by the host female bee. So this may sound a little bit gruesome, but it's actually a pretty smart evolutionary tactic. We only have so much time and energy in our lives, so taking shortcuts can often be a major advantage. And also these cuckoo bees really contribute to the diversity of bee species and really push bee diversity in BC. And here we have 3 different species of parasitic bees. We have Bombus insularis, which is a parasitic bumblebee. We have a Sphagodes, which is a parasite of sweat bees. And then we have a Coleoxys, which is a parasite of leafcutter bees. So some of our native bee species are cavity nesting, meaning that they build or excavate their nests in hollow stems. Mason bees and leafcutter bees, which are some of the bees, some of you may actually have nests at home that have been created for these bees, and they're examples of different types of cavity nesters. On the left here, we also have stem nesting bees, and here's a photo of a Martina, which is a small carpenter bee that actually digs into the pith of the center of dead plant stems and uses that to create a nesting cavity. Okay, so here we have a little video to show you to demonstrate how ground nesting bees, because the vast majority of our native bees are ground nesting. And here we have a small mining bee digging her way into a tunnel through some sandy soil. Yeah, she just disappears there. It always amazes me to just watch these bees as they're flying around and searching for their tunnels, because often they get covered back up. You know, you don't actually see a hole. So they use all these other olfactory and sensory cues to find their nests again.
Marika, I have a question. Can we play that one slide again? It happens so fast.
Yeah, it does have, I know I should have done it in slow-mo, but this is real time.
The video, I'm gonna just play it again.
Okay. They're cute.
That's in your backyard, actually.
Yeah, actually, this is just in my backyard. Lawns are actually a great place to find native bees, especially ones that are really like what we would call like crappy lawns, like ones with patches of all over the place. Those are like one of the best places to find bees in the city, actually. We'll get into that a little later. So many native bee species are generalist species, meaning that they can visit and provide for their offspring from pollen and nectar from a wide range of flowering species. And cities are really complex habitats with species of flowers from all over the world. So most of the species that we find remain and survive in urban ecosystems are opportunistic generalist species, meaning that these species often have a commensal relationship with humans, meaning that they can adapt and thrive in environments that have been changed and altered by human beings. So here we have some photos of native bees that are visiting some introduced or non-native species. So here in the top left, we have a mining bee visiting some milk vetch. We have another mining bee here visiting a common lawn daisy, and a bumblebee visiting a red clover, and another bumblebee visiting a yellow tansy right there in New Brighton Park. Now, the native bees that we really want to be a little more concerned about, especially in terms of conservation, are the specialist bees. So some species of wild bees are very specialized in collecting pollen and nectar from a single species of plant or family of plants. And they've actually adapted to these plants to rely on the specific nutritional constituents that the pollen of these plants provides. So for example, on the left here, we have a sweat bee, or Duphoria holocyana, that specializes in pollinating snowberry. And on the right here, we have another sweat bee, another Duphoria species actually, that specializes in pollinating Calochordus lilies in the interior. So these relationships are really highly beneficial to the plant because by having one species of bee that specializes in pollinating it, we have a much higher success rate in terms of pollination. Because think of a generalist bee who visits many different kinds of species, the pollination success rate is a little lower. So these bees are also, as I mentioned before, they're ones that we need to be the most concerned about, because if the plant disappears in the wild, or in a certain area, that bee will also disappear from that area. And finally, it's also important to acknowledge, I know we talk a lot about native bees, we're the Native Bee Society of BC, but it's really important to acknowledge that native bees are not the only pollinators that we need to be concerned about. Butterflies, moths, beetles, wasps, and hummingbirds are also very important pollinators in our wild and managed habitats that we really need to look after.
Okay, BC's native bees, why should we care, or why should you care about them? Why should you care about those bees? Well, and I just want to start with the image on the right. If you like to eat one of those foods shown on the slide, then you should probably care. As much as 75% of agricultural crops are directly or indirectly dependent on animal pollination, with bees being considered the most important contributors to crop pollination services. Also here with us in BC, native bees play a very important role in our local food system. And to give you a better idea, I want to show you another video.
Like many other crops in Canada, blueberries are dependent on pollination by bees. Bees are the most important pollinators in the insect world, and it's not just honeybees out there doing the work. Wild bees are active crop pollinators as well. Wild bee species are highly diverse. They differ widely in their forage preferences, flight times, and tolerance of weather conditions. Several wild bee species actively forage at lower temperatures and reduced sunlight, which means they're excellent pollinators during long periods of inclement weather. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada scientist Steve Javorek is getting the message out that wild bees are a very efficient pollinator and are very important for blueberry crop production. For Javorek, it's about protecting their habitat and making wild bees that live in the fringes of fields feel at home.
Where do they nest? What do they feed on? How far will they go to get food? And trying to take all those components and build them into the design of blueberry systems so that we're able to keep these wild bees in good numbers close to the blueberry fields. So when we need the pollination in the spring, we've got that community of, here in PEI, over 60 species of bees ready to help with the pollination.
Javorek is telling growers that by maintaining bushes and shrubs in the blueberry landscape, more bees will be working the fields during pollination time.
We're getting the benefits from honeybees still, but we're also starting to get the benefits of these wild bees.
Javorek's message to blueberry growers is simple. Protecting bee habitat will protect blueberry crops by protecting the pollinators that help make them possible. His message coincides with the guide on native pollinators published by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. It contains detailed information on how to create and protect wild bee habitat.
Pollinators in the landscape is a good thing. So we hope a guide like this really can focus attention on pollinators and those vital services that they do provide.
The Native Pollinators and Agriculture in Canada Guide can be found on our website.
So this is basically what's happening with us in Delta, so like really close to us. So they mentioned that native bees are really efficient pollinators, but they didn't mention that they're actually the better pollinators specifically for blueberries compared to honeybees. So native bees have been shown to not only buffer potential declines in agricultural production due to honeybee losses, but have also been shown to be more efficient pollinators for certain crops, that's blueberries, but also almond trees or other orchard trees. And yeah, especially with the current situation with Corona, like I've just seen a recent news article where they were talking about not being able to import honeybees and what that means for the pollination and blueberry crops, and how that actually shows how dependent people and like food, our food system here is on native bees, because they basically can take over what honeybees are doing otherwise. So basically they're really crucial when it comes to food security. In addition to global agricultural production, pollination of wild plants provides crucial food sources for wildlife. So without pollinators, many plants would be reduced in their production capability, and food webs and therefore whole ecosystems could collapse. So as an example here, native bees pollinate many wild plants, such as the nutcaroes in the photos, which then are eaten by deer, elk, moose, caribou, bighorn sheep, bears, and coyotes. The rose hips themselves are too eaten by various rodents. So, but what is happening to native bees in BC? So as we heard in the video at the beginning, native bees are facing many different threats. Unfortunately, it's no different here in BC. So native bees are being threatened by pesticides, climate change, invasive species, and diseases. As you can see on this photo, this bee is covered all over in pollen mites. But the biggest threat to native bees is habitat loss, and thereby the loss of nesting and food resources. So what can we do about this? How can we help? So generally speaking, as a society, we can and we need to do a lot in different areas, which can be quite a bit overwhelming to us individuals. And that's basically why we want to show you 2 concrete examples of how those solutions can look like, and how individuals and a group of people actually can make a difference. So the first example, I'm going to talk about my project that I did as a master's student at UBC. So I worked with a nonprofit conservation organization located in Delta that incentivizes farmers to plant hedgerows and grass margins on the edge of their farm fields to create habitat for wildlife. And surprisingly, we found that grass margins, such as shown in this photo, are very valuable habitats for native bees. It is important, though, that they are managed properly. And this means, for example, that they are mowed only partially or mowed late in the season after flowers bloomed, and that they're not treated with pesticides. So by protecting and restoring natural habitat within agricultural landscapes, both conserving wild bees and providing pollination services can be supported. So it's basically a win-win situation for both farmers and conservationists.
So I'm going to share a little bit on a recent project that we've been working at EYA as another example. And we've created 3 native wildflower meadows across East Vancouver. So on the left here is a photo of our meadow at Strathcona Community Garden, which was just replanted this year. And this meadow on the left, it contains a lot of, it's all a mix of native plants, not necessarily ones that commonly grow together, but the theme of this meadow was not only to provide habitat for pollinators, but also to provide food and medicine, because the caretakers or the youth that look after this meadow are Indigenous youth, and we're trying to reconnect them with preparing and cooking traditional foods. So these are all flowering species, though, that also support native bees. And on the right here is a nice photo of the meadow that we planted in Copley Orchard while it was in bloom last year. And this meadow was more planted with a biodiversity lens. So yeah, like with having a diversity of flowering species, colors, and shapes. And wildflower meadows in general are a great alternative to lawns if you don't mind the tallness of them. But you can even find some meadow mixes that contain lower growing blends. I know West Coast Seeds carry some. But one thing to keep an eye out for is that if you're looking to plant plants that are are native to coastal BC. Sometimes these mixes that are labeled as native actually contain species that are native to California, because they say Pacific Northwest blend, but to these companies, Pacific Northwest does extend all the way to California. So if that's the lens you're taking, make sure to keep an eye on that. But yeah, in general, planting mixes of pollinator-friendly herbs and shrubs and flowering trees in urban landscapes is an excellent way to support native pollinators in places where they've traditionally been displaced. So in the next section, we'll dive a little deeper into this. Exactly how can we garden and provide habitats for pollinators? So I've broken this down into 4 basic principles, and I've laid them out here, but let's go through them one by one. So first of all, natives, you may have heard this before, and I'm guessing here, because you're here and part of this whole event focused on, which part of it is a native plant sale, lots of us know about this. But native species in general are not only beneficial to native pollinators, but also native birds and other wildlife that are endemic to the areas that we reside in. So also, as we discussed previously, there are many specialist bees that rely on these native species for survival. So we really need to make sure that we're bringing them back into our urbanized landscapes. And sometimes though, native species can be difficult to source. So nativars or cultivars of common natives, I think, are also wonderful substitutes if you can't seem to find the native species you're looking for. So here we have 5 different species of plants that native bees love. First we have Nootka rose, and I don't know if any of you have ever seen this before, but watching bees pollinate Nootka rose is a beautiful thing. Like this bee, like I have a video of it too, which I didn't share, but they just kind of like part all the little stamens, and it's beautiful and very peaceful and heartwarming to watch. Next we have big leaf lupin, which is a big favorite of bumblebees, as well as some megachilid or hairy belly bees. Also gumweed here is an excellent source of food for late season pollinators because it blooms in later in August and September. And springbank clover is a native, like we see lots of clovers everywhere in the city, but most of them are actually non-native. They were brought over here with settlers as well. But here's a species of native clover to the Pacific Northwest, springbank clover, though it does it usually lives near kind of moist, sandy environments. So you do have to be particular about your planting conditions with this one. And finally, the last one I included here was Lacy Phacelia, which, as many of you probably know, it's not a native species. But on the other hand, I would consider this almost a nativar. There are native Phacelias to BC, but I've never seen them in a nursery before. And Lacy Phacelia still draws in an incredible diversity of native bees. So yeah, definitely recommend putting that in your gardens. So next, when planting pollinator landscapes, we also want to think about drifts. So planting in clumps. And this is an excellent strategy to support pollinators in our backyards and gardens. Drifts are very common in nature, and bees are more likely to be attracted to these large aggregations of flowers. And also from a bee's perspective, it can really save them a lot of energy to hop between flowers that are closer together. So yeah, very important in bee-friendly landscapes. Next, our third concept is we want to think about diversity when planting for pollinators. And when I say diversity, I mean in terms of species, colors, and bloom times. So here I've shared an example of a bloom calendar that I created for EYA when designing the meadows. And you'll see that I've listed all the species, their growth habits, and mapped out the colors as well as the bloom times. And by looking at these different columns, I can see what I will expect to have in bloom during any given month. And when selecting plants for your habitat, we really want to make sure that we include species that are coming out in early spring, in February and March. Like even here, you can see I had difficulty sourcing those. I just have the Western Yare or Achillea millifolium in the spring. but also late season bloomers. So flowers that are coming out in September and October, because these are often the times when resources are more scarce for native bees. And the reason we want to plant this diversity, just to go back, is just that every species of bee, over the 600 or close to that native species of bees, everyone has their own specific like mouth types and sizes and shapes. So it's important that we have this diversity so the different kinds of bees can access them. And finally, in terms of creating habitat, we want to think about nesting sites. So some of you may have mason bee houses in your backyard, but what I always love to encourage is to incorporate natural nesting sites. So for example, it's important to select it's good to select some stems of plants that are hollow after they die. So for example, plants in the rubus or blackberry and raspberry family have this property. So in their second year after they've matured, you can actually cut the dried out canes and leave them for stem nesting bees, just like the Martina on the left here. And also, as I've mentioned a few times here, if you have any dry, sandy areas in your garden that you just have left kind of unattended, we want to leave those for the native bees, because native bees really, the ground nesters really enjoy nesting in the ground. And sometimes they look for those dry, open areas of soil. And finally, if we're moving, one other thing to keep in mind is if you're moving around different piles of leaf litter in the fall, you really want to be careful not to bump into queen bumblebees, because often they will hibernate underneath the leaf litter. So just listen for a little buzz if you're like raking up some leaves there, because you might have disturbed a queen bumblebee. And there's just another little summary to wrap it all up. And next, we're on to our final component of the evening, which is a game. And this is a precursor to that first game that we showed. So this game is one that I like to call Bee or Not a Bee. So first of all, we're going to do this in an interesting format, another poll, just like we did with the other ones. So I'm going to show different photos of bees, and what you're gonna do is simply ask I'm gonna ask, do you think this is a bee or is it not a bee? And then you're gonna select your answer on the poll. And then I'll only give you about 10 seconds to this. We wanna do a pretty lightning speed round. And then after we see the answers, I'll share what the actual answer is. So here's our first one. So Charlotte will put up the poll here. And we're asking you to vote, is this a bee or is it not a bee?
Yeah, it's pretty clear.
Yeah, pretty clear. Okay, so the vast majority of our crew here have said yes. And in truth, the answer is not a bee. So here, and you know what, I empathize with many of you who were confused by this, because this bee is very successful in terms of its mimicry. Or it's not, I even called it a bee right there. It's not a bee. But what I want you to take a close look at for now is the head of this insect. And also the wings, and that might give you a clue to what it truly is. And next we'll switch to the next slide. So here's our next bee, and don't worry, we'll dig a little into these concepts in a minute. So let's put up the next poll for this bee. Bee or not a bee? Okay, and it looks like our resounding answer is yes. And Martina can reveal the truth. B. Oh, so everyone is correct with this. Very good. Some of you might recognize this bee. We referred to it a little bit in in our presentation already. This is Osmia lignaria, the blue orchard mason bee. So next, we're gonna kind of answer that question of like, why were so many of us stumped with that first insect? And what we were looking at in that first photo was a picture of a bee mimicking fly. And basically over millions and millions of years, these flies have evolved to look like bees because having the yellow and black coloration confuses predators and makes them think that this fly is a bee. So those flies didn't get eaten, whereas the flies that were visiting flowers that were more vibrant colors did get eaten. So that's kind of how we end up seeing these flies that look like bees. And here's a basic breakdown pulled, oh yeah, sorry, on this slide. Basic breakdown of how to tell apart the bees from flies. First of all, we want to look at the antenna. So I know this photo is really small here, but you'll see that the fly in the picture below has very short, stubby antenna, whereas the bee has longer antennae. And second, bees actually have 2 pairs of wings, whereas flies have just 1 pair, as well as a secondary set of halteres, which are kind of remnant wings that millions of years ago, their ancestors, fly ancestors did have wings, but they don't anymore. And third, flies tend to look a little more bulbous, like they have a thick waist that is not very pinched in the middle. And fourth, bees, well, female bees actually have pollen collecting hairs on their legs or bellies, whereas flies don't. But this is not a catch-all for all bees, because male bees actually don't have these pollen collecting hairs. And finally, bees have smaller eyes that are on the sides of their head. And when I'm working with kids and youth, I always get them to picture, like, imagine your entire head was 2 eyeballs. That's pretty much what a fly's head looks like. So whenever you think something is a bee, just double check that head and see if it looks like a fly or not. And Martina, can we just click back to that original photo of the fly, just so we can double check? There we go. So now hopefully with that knowledge that we've gained, looking at the head here, we can see that this fly has huge eyeballs and tiny antenna. So it's definitely a fly, but a very good bumblebee mimicking fly. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So let's open up the next poll, bee or not a bee?
Marika, I'm going to share the results this time so people can see it, because I don't know if
great.
you see the results last time, so I'll do that.
Okay, let's share the results now. I think most of the poll is in. So most of us said yes, I'm so proud. But I bet you some of the people who said no might have said that this was a bee before, right? Because it looks quite a bit like a honeybee. And it's so fascinating how close these mimics look to actual bees. But yeah, we see the fly eyeballs on the head, the 1 pair of wings. That's what gives it away. Next up. Okay, open up the polls. We got, is this a bee or is it not a bee? Okay, let's close that one up. And yes, very good. Most of us were right on this, that this is a very distinctive looking, it looks like a very typical wasp to us. And let's flick to the next slide. So one thing to note, first of all, is that technically bees are wasps. Actually, ants technically are wasps too. They're all in the same family. And that's why they have very similar ecologies and things, but also are similar in their appearance. The one difference between bees and wasps is, well, there's many differences, but the primary difference is their difference in what they eat. Wasps are predators of other insects, whereas bees are vegetarian. They get their pollen from, or they get their protein from pollen rather than other insects. So that's the precursor of why bees and wasps look really common. But here we have a list of different characteristics that can help you tell apart between bees or wasps. First of all, wasps tend to be narrower in their profile, whereas bees are a little more curvaceous. And wasps also, this can be really hard to see in flight, but if you see a wasp resting, they tend to have silver hair on their face, whereas bees don't. And third of all, wasps are usually hairless, or generally don't have much hair, and bees are often very fuzzy. And fourth, just like with flies, bees have these pollen collecting hairs, the female bees do, whereas wasps don't. And finally, wasps tend to have kind of skinny, spiny legs, whereas bees have more stout legs with relatively few spines. So let's go to the next one here. And we have 2 more to go, by the way. This is our second last one. So bee or not a bee? Okay, let's close up the polls and share the answers. So I'm very proud. Many of you got this right as well. This is Anthidium manicatum, which is actually not a native species. It's an introduced European wool carder bee, but lots of people confuse this bee for a wasp because it has yellow, what we call maculations, or kind of tattoos all over its body, which is common in wasps as well. Like for context, most bees get their color from their fuzz rather than, or their hairs rather than the stripes directly on their body. But how we can tell this is a bee is because it's got fuzz, lots of hair all over its body. You can even, if you look closely too, you can see the scopa, or the pollen collecting hairs on its leg as well, or on its underside, not its leg. Yeah. Great, so let's go to our very last one. And this one is a challenging one because I know we're all experts by now. So our last poll, is this a bee or not a bee? Remember, both wasps and bees, oh, one thing to say is both wasps and bees have 2 pairs of wings. So that's a clue I'll give you. And I'll give you a few more seconds to see if that shifts anything. Okay, interesting. So this is probably our most, let's share the results, probably our most even answer, and this is actually what I expect. So the answer is this is a bee, and it's a bit of a trick bee because this is actually a cuckoo bee. So remember we mentioned those parasitic bees before? Cuckoo bees actually don't have the pollen collecting hairs or the fuzz on their body that many typical bees do, because they don't actually forage for pollen for their young. They outsource that to another female bee instead. So this is a red nomada bee. Great. Okay, so this is the end. Oh, I'll pass it on to Martina now.
So remember those 10 insects from the beginning. So if you participated in the poll before, would you still agree with what you thought were bees? So I think we should check on that again, and let's do the poll again and see how we are doing this time. And this time we're also gonna tell you, we're gonna reveal which ones are the bees. So, okay. I'll give you a couple more seconds. Okay, let's end the poll. So yeah, it's looking really good. So I'm gonna disclose the big mystery of the bees. The bees on this photo or on this slide actually are number 2. So you got that right. Number 4 also looks really good. Here's the guess.
They're circular. Now we circle. Thank you. Mystery circular.
So we have number 2, number 4, number 6, 7, 8, and 10. So I think overall it looks really good. So you guys did a really good job. And congratulations to everyone who guessed right. Okay, and with this poll, we arrived at the end of our presentation. So we hope you feel more confident in recognizing bees, but it very much looks like so, given your answers. And we hope that you will like go outdoors and go outside and see lots of bees and remember how to recognize them. And thanks everyone for staying with us. I believe we might have some time to answer questions, but I just want to point out for future reference, if you should have any bee-related questions, don't hesitate to contact us at bcnativebees@gmail.com. Thank you so much for staying with us, and I'll give the word to Charlotte.
That was awesome. I was wrong on a lot of those bees. We have a few people asking questions on the slide, the big bee reveal. Can we go through what people are curious about? What number 10 is? What number 9 is?
Interesting. Okay, so remember on the slide where I showed the rainbow bees? There was a turquoise bee in there. That's the same as this bee, and it's a type of sweat bee in the genus Agapostemon, and they're very common in the city, especially if you check out plants in the aster family, like daisies and
buttercups too.
Buttercups. Actually, buttercups are a different family, but you're right. They do visit buttercups as well. And number 9 is an interesting one. It's actually technically a species of wasp, but it's called a velvet ant. And I don't know if you can, I've never seen one in the city before, but I've seen a lot of them in the interior. Yeah, so those are really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, those are not all species specific to the city. So those are just kind of examples to test people's knowledge if they are actually like recognize what a bee is, because like for most bees, as you said at the beginning, it's just honeybees, right? So they kind of steal the spotlight on like whatever else there is, and like what a huge diversity we have also here.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for answering those questions. We have quite a few questions. Some people were asking some at the beginning, so I'm just scrolling up to the beginning. So Sarah is asking that there's a study that counted 56 species in BC. She's just wondering if there is a link. What you can do is maybe chat that to me at some point, and then I can forward it to you, Sarah, and I'll just write down your name. But do you want to chat me your email, Sarah, and I can get that to you? Awesome. Okay, and then
actually one thing to note though is that study was done in 2001, so it's quite old, and someone else needs to do another study of native bees in BC. So
that was only in the city, that is not in BC. So that was in the city of Vancouver.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So in BC we have 483 confirmed species, but also like given that there's probably like way more that we haven't yet confirmed.
Wow, awesome. So definitely need for research there. Hey. Okay. That's, sorry, bear with me, you guys. Okay, we have a question from a teacher at an elementary school on Salt Spring Island. They studied bees this year, including wild bees. What educational resources are available for students to deepen their knowledge about wild native bees? Do you have any suggestions for projects, lessons, units, or activities for my students?
Well, I can answer that. So let's think about this. So one resource I would definitely point you towards is Environmental Youth Alliance, the organization I work for, has a guide to common pollinators. I actually have it on my shelf right here. Common Pollinators of British Columbia. And though the physical quantities, the physical books are out of print now, you can find it online if you just Google EYA Common Pollinators of BC. And this was actually not only created by EYA, we partnered with an organization called Border Free Bees, which are a collective of artists. And it has beautiful diagrams that show the anatomical features of different pollinators and how to differentiate them. So there's a honeybee, here's a mining bee. One thing to note is that this guide, it breaks them down into not species, but morphological groups. So that's one thing to consider, is that it's not very like taxonomically reliable, but for kids and youth and people who are first dipping their toes into the world of bee diversity, this is great. Another thing to check out that's a companion to this is the Insight Citizen Science app. And that was created independently by Border Free Bees. It's called Insight, like spelled INSIGHT, Citizen Science. And if you Google that and look on the Border Free Bees website, they have a paper observation form as well as a protocol that you can take and practice out in the garden with your students.
That is so fun. I'm going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy that question was asked. This is a question that's getting asked quite a bit. Do honeybees compete with wild bees, native bees, I'm assuming?
Do you want to answer that, Martina?
Sure. Like, this is actually a question that like a lot of my friends are asking me as well. Because I guess one of the common things that people want to do to help bees is like, oh, I'm just going to put up some honeybee hives in my backyard and I'm helping the bees. And it's actually, it's not really making a difference, because I think, as Marika mentioned as well in the presentation, honeybees, because they're so numerous, they're just like, they outcompete like native bees just by numbers. And I think one has to be like very cautious of like where to put out those honeybee hives. So yeah, if there's like enough resources, like if you live in like a really in a neighborhood that has a lot of resources and maybe not a big density of like other honeybee hives, I think it's like less problematic. But I think it's like really always a matter of like how many resources, how many flowers are available. And so there's definitely studies that have shown that there are competing, just because like resources are rather declining. So that's the main problem here.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I also just want to do a plug, because like I really don't like to like vilify honeybees. I actually love honeybees, and I was a beekeeper myself. I actually developed a really serious allergy to them though, so I can't beekeep anymore. But honeybees are like, especially with the way our food system currently is designed, we really need honeybees to feed the world. So, and they also are like, I don't know if any of you have been inside a honeybee hive before, but it's like an experience like no other. They're beautiful, beautiful creatures. And I think they play an important place in the world.
Mm-hmm. I have a question from Ellen is asking to share the info. I'll just answer this. I'm recording this all, so this will be put into a video, and then I will share it with everyone who RSVP'd. It will live on our website, so you can review all the information. However, maybe are there certain slides, like are some of this available on the Native BC on your guys' website?
Not the slides, but that map, like in terms of the distribution of bees, is from our website.
I'll send out the video later and you'll have all the information. Mm-hmm. I think we answered your question, Janet, about the impact of native honeybees taken to natural sites to make honey on the native bees. So I think that links into resource availability, kind of, that competition. Okay. Ooh, this is a good question. Are these bee mimicking flies pollinators? If they don't pollinate, why do I see these bee mimicking flies visiting the flowers?
Do you want to answer that, Martina, or should I?
Go ahead, Doug. I think maybe you have some.
So bee mimicking flies are pollinators. But the difference, what sets apart bees from other pollinators is that we can call them active pollinators. So they're visiting the flower to collect both pollen and nectar to bring back and provide for their babies. Whereas flies, butterflies, hummingbirds, wasps, these types of pollinators, they visit flowers purely for the nectar. So they're visiting the flower, they're slurping up nectar, and they're passively picking up pollen on their bodies. Whereas bees are like, oh, give me that pollen, put it on my face, put it on my belly. That's what the difference between bees and other pollinators, and why bees are such effective pollinators compared to flies and other pollinating species.
That was a great answer. Thank you for that. Do all bees have stingers, or are there bees that do not have stingers?
I can only take a guess because I'm not 100% sure, but I believe they might all have stingers, but they are not actively using them. So this is also a question or like a concern that a lot of people have. Let's say if they want to get some mason bees, for example, those little bee hotels, and then they're scared like, oh, they're gonna sting our neighbors' kids or something the like. So I think what we can say pretty certainly is that they're only stinging like if they really absolutely have to. In comparison to like honeybees, they're like more likely to sting because they're protecting their colony and they're protecting their queen. So I think it's really unlikely that native bees are stinging. So I know that bumblebees, that happens if you like step on them and like you basically don't give them any other choice. But other than bumblebees, I haven't heard of someone being stung. But as I said, I'm not 100% sure. So Marika, maybe you have some more to say to this.
Yeah, so in terms of stingers, people often think like, oh, do some bee species have stingers and others don't? The division actually isn't by species, it's by gender. Female bees all have stingers, whereas male bees don't. But certain bees are more likely to sting than others. Socially nesting bees, for example, like honeybees and bumblebees, when you're close to their nests, the likelihood of getting stung is a lot higher. Also, the smaller bees, like the little mining bees, they have stingers and they can sting you, but like it's such a small stinger that it doesn't even penetrate the skin, so it wouldn't really hurt.
You might not even realize it then.
Exactly, and different bees have different temperaments. Like mason bees I've worked with a lot, and they're like one of the gentlest bees I've ever met. And yeah, and one other thing just to say, the reason why female bees have stingers and males don't is that it's actually it's evolved from the egg-laying structure of bees, the ovipositor, and that's why the female bees have stingers.
Wow, so interesting. Okay, next question is another one from Sarah. Would you call parasitic bees carnivorous?
I probably wouldn't call parasitic bees carnivorous. Like they do kill their host bees, like the larvae definitely, and sometimes the adult bee, but they don't actively eat them. The larva, the developing larva eats the ball of pollen that was left behind the host female bee. So they're still vegetarian, maybe like a little bit of bee in there accidentally. But.
Okay. Next question is from Kathleen. How can we encourage mason bees to come to a bee box / home? And before you answer that, I will quickly say that in our series, we did a mason bee workshop using really simple materials, which I will follow up with a video on that to everyone who participated here. But if Martina or Marika want to further answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
This is a great question because I do have the same question too. Like this is the second season I tried to put out like, my mason bee boxes, and I haven't been successful neither with like having them coming back. So I also don't know like what the reason is for that. I always would have guessed that it's like, oh, they need to have enough flowers around. And I know the weather is also a big factor. Like if you put them out and it's like raining for like, I don't know, an extended amount of time, I know that it's like hard for them. But that hasn't been the case this year. So I'm pretty clueless about that, concerning that as well.
For me, I would say that the best way to encourage wild mason bees to nest in your backyard is to make sure you have lots of flowering resources available. And especially those early spring flowers like February and March, because mason bees are one of our first bees to emerge. So if you have, if your garden doesn't have flowers in February or March, the bees are not going to want to hang out there. And second, another way to get mason bees to nest in your house is to actually purchase cocoons. You can purchase the cocoons of Osmia lignaria from West Coast Seeds and a company called Bee Diverse. And EYA is actually going to start giving out mason bee cocoons next year. We just built a mason bee hotel this year for that reason. And so, but the thing with cocoons as well is if you put them in your nest box and you don't have flowering resources in your backyard, all those bees are going to fly away. So just make sure you have flowers is the bottom line.
Awesome. I'm just wondering, Martina, can you jump back to the screen between the differences between flies and bees? She just wants to see the screen.
Mm-hmm.
The next question is, can you speak more to how the wildflower meadows were created? That's just like a separate question from the screen.
Okay. So this is like at the top of my learning experiences right now, how to create wildflower meadows. And it's a very complex and interesting process. But the first thing you need to do with creating wildflower meadows from lawn, at least, is to remove lawn. And the best way to do that is to solarize or to sheet mulch the area for an entire season. So you'd actually want to do that about now to cover up the whole area that you're planning to plant in, and then let that over the course of a season, that will kill the grass underneath. Like, make sure you look a little bit more into this because I don't have time to go into the details of this. So you want to kill the grass, and then in the fall is when you would want to plant a native wildflower meadow from seed, because a lot of the seeds of native wildflowers, that's when they naturally fall to the ground. And also they need the cold temperatures of the winter to stratify and be ready to bloom in the spring. So that's like the most economically efficient way to plant native wildflowers meadows. That's actually not what we did at EYA. We actually used the sod cutter, where we lifted up all the grass, and then we planted some of the meadows we planted from containers or plugs, and then interseeded with grass. But yeah, it's been a huge trial and error learning process, and two great companies to look at that have lots of resources and info on this. One is the Xerces Society. They have a guide on creating native wildflower meadows from seed. And also, well, actually, I'm going to list three. There's Northwest Meadowscapes, which actually has my favorite native wildflower seed blend, because unlike some other local seed companies, their native wildflower blends are actually native to the Georgia Basin, like the Pacific Northwest. And they're just over the border in Washington on Whidbey Island. And third, the other organization or business that I really like is Saanich Native Plants. That company is run by two meadow experts that did their masters on meadow restoration. So we're actually consulting with them for some of our meadows this year as well. Yeah.
That's awesome. We reached out when this event was going to be in person. We were going to purchase some native plants from Saanich because they're amazing, and they've got a lot of knowledge, which is incredible. Thank you for that detailed answer. That's awesome. Maddie, I'm going to get to your questions if you have time. She's got good questions. She works for Wild Bird Trust, so we might have to bug her later. There's a lot of questions. Okay, this one is a very good question. So there's part two, there's two questions. So my question for either or all of you to answer: how do you maintain optimism when doing this kind of conservation and outreach work? How do you feel about the future, given the existential threats to bees and other species? And then the second question is, recently I've been hearing a lot about the threat of the Asian giant hornet. Is this overblown? Is this a distraction from more important issues like pesticide and climate change? So two good questions. I mean,
I start, Martina, and then fill in the gaps.
I work all the time, but if you guys have an answer for that, I'd love to hear it.
The first one, yeah, it's a really good question, and I think this is true for like a lot of researchers in like a lot of different actually different directions. It's like basically everything you do and everything you read is always like there's always a decline, there's always something negative, and it is tough. I do feel that as well. It is tough to kind of keep motivated because you feel like, what is the point? So I think it's like a general kind of thing that we have to deal with, like an anxiety. But I also want to say that once you become like more aware or more interested in certain topics, you will also see like some good news, and like you will connect with other people that also care and are also excited about like biodiversity or bees. So I find that is really helpful. Just connect with people that are like-minded and super passionate about the same topic. And yeah, keep your eyes out also for the good news, because there are good news. There's really a lot happening, and like people tend to care, especially bees is a really good one. I think people, like everyone like loves the bees and everyone cares, and also just like talking to your friends and like telling them little tidbits and like, this is what you can do. I found that is kind of like the ripple effect that I like to see, where I feel like, well, you can like write scientific papers and all that, but I think what makes the actual difference is like talking to your friends and then seeing how they start to care and how they start to send you little photos and they start to like plant native species and such things like that. So I think like the positive aspects are actually like more than the negative ones. Yeah, Marika, do you want to say something?
I would say
a big
that,
question.
Yeah, though I am really like, yeah, definitely disheartened by the loss of biodiversity and habitat around the world. It's so easy to get excited about bees. First of all, they're just so cute, and they're like fun. I think they just have this magical ability to like put peace into your heart. And like whether that's a honeybee or a native bee, I just think they're beautiful, gentle creatures like that. Another thing that really like sucks me and draws me into the world of native bees and insects in general is that there is so much that we don't know yet. There are so many species that so many bees out there that don't even have scientific names assigned to them yet. So that's why it's so important for people to get into bee conservation, because we need to know about those bees so they don't disappear without us ever knowing about them, or that's how I feel at least. So yeah, that's what definitely fuels me and motivates me. And finally, just to echo what Martina said, like the people in the world who love bees are just like amazing and fun people. Like our board meetings are just, I look forward to them every month. And I just love the community in Vancouver that exists around bees. And if you want to be a part of that, you can easily just become a member of the Native Bee Society of BC, and you'll be invited on all our bee walks and get to talk about bees with us too.
That's awesome. Thank you guys.
Hornet question?
Yeah,
too.
Hornet question.
Do you want to start with that, Martina?
I just kind of like want to point out a blog post that a co-member of the Native Bee Society wrote that is really good. And I think rather than like talking too much about it, I can share it also in the chat, or yeah, if I stop sharing my screen, I can actually share it right now because I have it open in my tab.
And while Martina's doing that, I'll share like kind of the general consensus of the Native Bee Society on the Asian giant hornet. And first of all, like one thing to say is that, so there's been a lot of hype about Asian giant hornet this year. And the reason that is because there was that post from the New York Times, talking like with the headline "Murder Hornet." And the truth is that the hornets actually haven't been seen since last year. And last year we only had, I think, one confirmed sighting of a Asian giant hornet in White Rock, and also a nest on Vancouver Island near Nanaimo. And that's a story of like the guy who says they felt like hot thumbtacks. But both of those nests were, both of those cases, the wasps were killed and destroyed. And in reality, like 2 confirmed cases in all of North America isn't very much. So I would say like the society and bee scientists are concerned, like we're watching it closely, and we really want people to send in photos if they can, if they see it, but not really afraid yet at this point. And one fear that I've heard a lot in the bee community is that people might, with this really hyped up fear that exists in the world, people might start confusing native wasp species for these Asian giant hornets. And we really don't want people, like people have actually, there's been reports of people killing queen bumblebees thinking that they were Asian giant hornets. So we really want to dispel some of that fear, because we don't want our natives, important and crucial native species, to be killed out of this mass hype. So, but as Martina is going to share, as she said, one of our colleagues put together this excellent post kind of dispelling the truth from the myths.
Awesome. Someone is asking about a link to the article talking about native bees, or the need for native bees with coronavirus making honeybees hard to access. I would also just say there's a documentary called The Pollinators, which really shows, like the industry of honeybees. Like Marika said, they're like, our food supply system is totally dependent on them. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like, in terms of links to articles and stuff like that, maybe I'll follow up. I'm not sure if we can access everything they sourced, but I'll follow up.
I will send them to you, and then you can maybe distribute them after.
Sounds good. I will just take down that name then. We are running out of time, so I'm just going to try to quickly go through some more questions. Heather is asking, Marika, can you just repeat the little info package of the common bee species you'll find? Because that would be a great... So Heather, this is for you. Common pollinators of British Columbia. She said you can find it on the EYA website, right?
Yeah, just the easiest way to find it is just Google Common Pollinators of British Columbia, EYA, and it'll take you to the link on our website. Or it's also, I think, if you go to the EYA page, it's on the banner. If you click a bunch, it's like at the very end of the banner. So, yeah.
Okay, awesome. There's so many good questions, but we're totally running out of time, you guys. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna be able to get to everything. Let's just do 2 more. Okay, sorry. I never knew bees could come in so many colors. The 10 insect slide, what's the evolutionary reason for insect 10's amazing color? That's a good question. I think that was the sweat bee.
Oh, that one I don't know the answer to, actually, like how that color evolved.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it like yellow and black, for example, in bees is just a common warning color in nature. And so green, like I have no idea, honestly, but my best guess would be that, like, maybe camouflage.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. I have one more question that kind of is a 2-parter from 2 different people. I'm going to link them together. Rob is asking, does having a honeybee hive in the backyard in Vancouver negatively negatively impact native bee populations. And then Kirsten followed up by saying, and if that is true, are mason bees a good option for someone to keep? So a bit of a two-parter.
Mm-hmm. I can just maybe reiterate, like I kind of like mentioned that before. The main difference between mason bees and honeybees is that like honeybees are just like so higher in numbers compared to mason bees. So mason bees, you probably like one have more than like 100 or so. Like most people, there's definitely people that have like huge, huge mason bee numbers as well. But honeybees, because they're like in the thousands, that just means that they're like they just need more food sources. And again, I was thinking about that actually too, if there is maybe some information available of the amount of honeybee hives in the city of Vancouver to see how the coverage is. Because I would say like there is plenty of food resources in the city. So I think the competition shouldn't be too fierce, but it's definitely like something to consider if you live somewhere where there might not be that many like floral resources. So that is kind of like what you have to look out for. Mm-hmm. How is the food situation? Like, is there enough food for everyone?
Okay, awesome. I think with that, that is probably all the time we have for questions. It's 8:00 now. I just want to say thank you so much, Marika and Martina. That was amazing. I mean, I'm no native bee expert. I thought I knew a bit, but I learned so much. This was really, really awesome. I just want to say that this is the last of our webinar series. If you attended all 3, thank you so much. If this is the last one you jumped onto, that's amazing. I don't know, who knows? Maybe we'll do it again next year. The goal is in person, but we'll see. I'm going to hand it over to Leanne in a minute. But thank you again, you guys, for coming, everyone who attended. If you are interested in purchasing native plants, check out Wild Bird Trust website as well. Okay, wait, sorry, someone's very persistent. They need to have this question answered. Wait, are minions bees? I have to know.
Who's to say?
Who's to say?
No.
Oh, we can't, no one knows. Great question. People are okay. But yeah, so thank you so much. If you're in a position to, please donate to either Wild Bird Trust or the Wilderness Committee. We're both splitting the funds for these webinar series. So thank you so much if you're able to. And Leanne, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you to Marika and Martina for your excellent presentation. I learned a lot. I think as co-host, I wasn't able to participate in the polls, so, but still, I learned a lot, and I'm sure I would have got at least half wrong. Thank you also to Maddie Edmonds, who's a volunteer, currently a volunteer with us, and is handling a lot of the online plant sales. That's where you can find a lot of the flowers and the plants that would be really tasty, attracting for these bees that are so important to us. And happy World Bee Day. Also, thank you to Charlotte, and also thank you to the presenters, C. Swice, who did our Mason Bee workshop, and Lori Snyder, who did our virtual plant walk. So thanks everyone. Great presentation.
Thank you. And yes, shout out to Maddie, who helped get this whole thing going from the get-go.
That's right.
Yeah, so many amazing people involved in this, and I'm so happy we still did this. I learned so much. Take care, everyone.
Woohoo.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Happy
Bye.